Welcome everyone to episode number 34 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. I'm your host Jesse, and I'm with, as always, the one and only man with a mustache, Andrew.
Hello.
If you're new to this podcast, welcome. We strive for the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast to be fun, informative, inspiring, and, of course, entertaining. If we were boring, you wouldn't want to listen to this.
But mostly inspiring. This is like chicken soup for the fisherman's soul.
It's true. We do hope that you do learn something when you listen to our podcast, or at the very least, if you know everything, because there's guys out there that know everything, at least enjoy yourself while you're taking your commute, or you're relaxing at home, or even some of you guys and girls listen to us at work, which is great. That's what this podcast is all about. Today's episode is a special one because this is the Frightening Fishing Fears podcast. Today we are going to scare you. We're going to unlock a few new fears that Canadian anglers have to deal with. But before we do that, we would just like to thank all the previous sponsors, giveaway sponsors that we had for our first season. Actually, season 1 is coming to an end. Mm-hmm. We're a few episodes away, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to start with season 2. We have a lot of exciting news for that, but we're going to cover that later. But we would like to thank all of our podcast sponsors that we had over the last 34 episodes so far. It's awesome working with local companies. And a lot of you guys and girls have won some pretty awesome prizes, so that's amazing. But before we get into the main topic, we have an interesting fishing fact. And for that, we have the one and only Andrew.
Well, it's not an interesting fishing fact, so we failed our listeners again.
Oh. All right, your rating already is, it's going to be a D-. Also, on our last interesting fishing fact, when I talked about musky teeth, and Andrew gave me a 91, I actually had 3 people message me and say that was total bull.
It was a 91 and a half.
It was at least a 93. Anyway, go ahead. What are you doing?
I am doing a story time.
Ooh, story time. I love story time.
So this one, in doing a bit of research for today's podcast, I remembered something that I had experienced years ago, and I don't remember if you were there. I think you were, but I was fishing up north, lake I used to fish all the time for pike, and I had caught about 24-inch pike or something like that. We'd keep the small ones, you'd flay them up. We got pretty good at filleting them. The meat on a pike is delicious.
It's very good.
So I'm sitting there at the boat launch, and I'm flaying this pike, and all of a sudden, right beside me, this branch shatters on the rocks. I'm like, that's weird. I look down. It's like an 18-inch, maybe 3/4 inch around stick. I'm like, that's weird. It just fell out of the tree right beside me. So I didn't think anything of it. It was odd. It wasn't windy, but whatever. And then 30 seconds later, another one hits right off my other shoulder, right on the ground beside me, other side. I'm like, what the heck? This is so bizarre. I got real confused. I turned around to look up, and what do I see but an osprey nest on top of a pole about 20, 30 feet behind me. But the thing is, it's sitting 40 feet in the air, right?
Yeah. So
I look, and I just see this osprey. And I don't know if you've ever seen a bird of prey stare at you, but it looks hilarious and intimidating at the same time. And so I just see this osprey with his giant yellow eyes just staring into my soul. And I'm like, that's so... is he throwing it? I've never heard of this before. And his head disappears, comes back with a branch in his mouth, and just whips it at me. So while I'm trying to flay this pike as fast as possible, this osprey is just pelting me with sticks from the nest. So
he was mad that you caught his fish.
Yeah. So what I did is I kept the fillets, and then I just tossed the I shouldn't say this because it's technically illegal, although I did not know at the time. You're not supposed to throw the remains of your fish into the water. But I threw it into the shallow water, and the osprey came down and got it. So,
are you friends now?
I don't think so.
He's probably long dead right now, unfortunately.
But I was thinking of, different fears or different dangers that we could encounter. And ospreys, I didn't think would ever be on that list. But had I been looking straight at one of those sticks, I could have, taken my eye out with that.
You could have been impaled. That's
so
funny.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has ever experienced that, because you always see them. We fish the Kawarthas a lot.
Yeah.
And on every single lake you go to, you have an osprey that comes down and you'll see him scoop up something out of the water and I gotta go fish that spot because that's where the fish are, obviously.
Yeah, it's true. I always like when you see the ospreys and you're just having a terrible day fishing and they dive down right in front of you and catch a fish. You're like, come on.
Show off.
That's not cool. Oh, I love story time because got a lot of people that are like, you guys have been fishing together so long. You must have a lot of stories. It's we have a ton of stories. Most of them are terrible. But that was a good one. So I thought because we have a lot to cover today because it's so spooky and scary. But before we get into that, we would just like to thank our Patreon members.
Yes.
So these cool people donate a few bucks every month to help us cover our monthly expenses of running this weekly show. Now you may think, these guys are just talking to a microphone. How much could it cost? It's not a lot, but it's not a little either. So we do thank all the people, and I'm going to name their names right now. We really appreciate you guys chipping in to help us put a dent in the cost. We have our friend Ted, we have Frank, Daniel, John, Matthew, Blair, Conrad, Earthquake, Jason, and of course Wes from Wham Baits, who is a gold member, just because he's a cool guy. But I'm sure all those other guys are really cool too. So we do appreciate all those people that are pitching in to support our expenses for running the show on a weekly basis. Now, on to the main topic. I thought we could start off with a quick and easy question, Andrew. What is fear? How would you describe it?
Oh, that's super easy to describe something so vague. Yeah, I'd say fear is...
Okay, let me tell you, because I looked it up. Fear is an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. Make sense?
Sounds like anxiety to me.
It is. You may get anxiety from having fear.
Oh.
So I didn't know this. There are 3 different types of fear, and you may have had one of these while fishing. There's 3 types. One is called rational fear, and that occurs where there is a real imminent threat. And example, someone running at you with an axe. That is rational fear because your mind is like, that's bad. There's no doubt about it. Okay. The next one is called primal fear. And primal fear is defined as an innate fear that is programmed into our brains, basically like a sense that we have. And you may think of something like, when you sense that someone is a psychopath, you just have that feeling and it causes fear. That is
feeling it right now.
Yeah, that is called a primal fear. Another primal fear is just something built into us. Mm-hmm. It would be like the fear of snakes because, it's passed down through generations like, oh, snakes are bad and you're afraid of them. And it may be something that you've never seen before, but you're instantly afraid of them. That's called a primal fear, something built into you. And the last one is called an irrational fear, which is the funniest one. Well, it's not funny if you actually have an irrational fear. I apologize, but irrational fears are the ones...
Your fears are a joke to Jesse. Now are you, mad at me for giving me a poor rating? This guy is hating on people with irrational fears.
If you're afraid of clowns, I don't care. Anyway, irrational fears are ones that don't make logical sense. They can vary greatly from person to person. So one is clowns. That's a common one. It doesn't make sense. They're supposed to be happy, but you look at them and you're like, holy crap, that thing is terrifying.
Yeah.
That is an irrational fear. Another one, I remember watching, I think it was like on a Maury show or Jerry Springer, something like that. And they're like, this woman is terrified of olives.
Oh, yes.
And she couldn't see an olive. Like that is a perfect example of an irrational fear. Okay.
So here's a question then.
Okay.
We were fishing for muskie just like a few days ago. And I caught a muskie, nice like 32 incher.
Yeah.
And I released it. And I was talking to you about a fear that I always have whenever we're in musky waters, especially after I just catch a muskie, because 100%, I know there's one within 10 feet of the boat, right?
Yeah.
I just released it. And so you get slime on your hands from handling this fish, and I go in the water and I rinse off my hand and I'm splashing my hand in the water beside the boat. And I'm always like, what? Like, there's always a part of me is like, what if this muskie is like, sees that splash and he's like, I'm getting back at you. Just like whips around, like bites my hand. Like, would that be a primal or irrational fear? Or rational?
Actually, I think that could be all of them because rationally, there is a real danger. There is a fish that has been known to attack humans nearby the boat.
Razor sharp teeth.
It's also primal because as an angler, you know that these fish are, crazy.
And they'll hit boat side.
And then if maybe you're not an angler and someone told you that, they may think of it as an irrational fear because it doesn't make sense. So like, well, why would a fish bite your hand? It's a muskie. They're crazy. They do things. So I thought today in this podcast, we could cover 5 frightening fishing fears, and then me and Andrew can decide which type of fear they actually are.
Okay.
And then the kicker is at the end, we asked a question on our Instagram stories, which by the way, if you're not following us on Average Ontario Anglers on Instagram, make sure you do because we do polls and we ask questions all the time that we discuss on our podcast. We actually had like 70 people send us their biggest fishing fear. So we're going to go through some of those. So to start off, Andrew's going to discuss a crazy and spooky, well, I guess it's not spooky. It's more like, it's scary though. It's a fishing fear. So I don't know what it is because we didn't discuss this before. Okay. So what is this? I'm expecting something terrifying.
All right, so
Okay.
I want you to imagine the scene.
Okay. I'm here.
You're taking your canoe, you're going backcountry fishing, and you're going from like one lake to another. But the water level in this little creek to get there is like super shallow. So instead of portaging, you just step out of the canoe and start dragging your canoe through like the shallow water. And then all of a sudden, lurking below, there's an unknown menace. You're like, oh, it's shallow water, it's clear, it's pristine. Out of nowhere, you feel your foot get pierced with something very sharp. And as you recoil in pain, it tears even more.
Ugh.
And on top of all that, you have now been poisoned.
What?
This is called the Mad Tom. And it's not the Mad Tom IPA. Because if you Google Mad Tom, it'll be like, Muskoka Brewery, Mad Tom IPA. I'm talking about something that's way more dangerous than alcoholism, okay?
Okay.
Although,
pretty dangerous.
I don't know, maybe that's not true. So the Mad Tom is a type of catfish. Specifically, we have the northern Mad Tom here in Ontario.
Okay.
Its range like stretches from like down in the States all the way up here. There's over a dozen different types of these like catfish, these toms, Mad Toms. So they are very similar to a catfish. You look at it, you just say catfish. They're brown in color, or like light brown or yellow with some brown splotches on it. And they have whiskers, a long flat face. Picture in your head like a brown bullhead with just cooler color patterns on it.
Okay.
Now, I do have a photo I want to show you, Jesse, and I'll probably send it. I don't know if it can be put up on the video. But that is the skeletal structure of a Mad Tom.
Ooh, it's deadly.
So those barbs, like, that looks gnarly.
That looks
Absolutely
like some kind
gnarly.
of medieval bone saw.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. So what happens is they actually have poison sacs at the base of the barbs on the pectoral fins and the dorsal fin, just like most catfish have. But the Mad Tom, thankfully, they only grow to about 4 to 6 inches long. That's like 8 inches, like the maximum one's ever been found. They don't live in sediment-rich water. They have to have clean water. So because of a lot of pollution and different things, the ecosystems have been messed up. So they're actually on the vulnerable list. They're not quite endangered, but they're pretty close. There's not many of their natural habitats that they're actually still around in. But what would happen is if something was to attack these are defensive weapons more than they're trying to. But if you were walking barefoot through a creek, there's a chance you could step on one of these and either their pectoral fins will swing around and get you, or you're stuck right in the dorsal fin. And what happens is on humans, the poison, it essentially feels like a bad bee sting. So it's not like the worst thing ever. You don't like, oh, I need to go to the hospital and get antivenom. Like it's not like that. But the reason why, and the research I've found it's called Mad Tom, is because different animals, when they get stabbed with these things, they start acting mad because it's painful, right?
Okay.
So they'll start acting crazy because out of the blue, this random catfish that got stabbed by has now made them start to act out. So that's kind of apparently that's where they got the name Mad Tom.
That's interesting.
So yeah.
I've never even heard of those things. And I'm glad I haven't. But that new fear unlocked. And I'll tell you, that's why I don't walk barefoot down in the creek.
I like to. You gotta live a little, Jesse.
Yeah, you gotta feel those nymphs between your toes. And the Mad Tom.
You ever have the nymphs like been swimming in a river or something like that, and then you have nymphs in your swim shorts? You're like, oh, what's this, like pinching? And like reach down like in your thigh and like, oh, it's a stone nymph, and like whip it away.
No.
Yeah, I've had it a couple times.
If you ever want more information about Andrew's pants nymphs, please message him directly. I don't want to have anything to do with this.
Got nymphs?
Yeah. So, what kind of fear is the Mad Tom? What would you say? If you had to pick one of them, is it a rational fear, a primal fear, or an irrational fear?
Based on the fact that they aren't very popular at all, and most of the creeks they used to be in, they aren't in anymore. Yeah, I would say it's more of an irrational fear.
I would agree with that. Anyway, so the next fear. Now, that was pretty scary, but that's nothing compared to what I got. We're kind of competing here. So, when I think of the most scary thing, the thing that I'm the most afraid of is getting struck by lightning. Wouldn't you say?
That's right off the bat, that is a rational fear.
There is I'll fish through heavy rain, no problem, wind, but as soon as you hear that, that lightning bolt go down and then you hear the thunder just, rumble, and you're out in the middle of the lake, you're in a mad dash. You're in a panic at that point.
Or worse, your fishing line starts to just kind of like float up.
Yeah, or the hairs on your arm just start standing up.
Yeah.
So here are some interesting fishing facts about lightning. So, what are the odds of getting struck by lightning? You may have heard, it's a 1 in a million chance. That's actually fairly accurate, apparently. It's 1 in a million. But in Canada, usually about 10 people die every year from getting struck and killed by lightning. And over 80 are seriously injured.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, this is an interesting fact. There are over 2 million lightning strikes in Canada per year. But if you're not careful, one could find you.
So hold on, there's 2 million strikes a year. And
Okay, let's not do the math here.
how many people die and how many people get injured?
Up to 10 people die per year.
So
And
that's already like death by lightning strikes in Canada is 200 million you said lightning strikes.
2 million.
What? So that's more than that's even more terrifying.
See?
That's like only like 1 in 250,000?
Yeah. And the sad thing is, or the crazy thing is, if you're an angler, your odds are way higher than if you stay home and read books or play Nintendo. So fishing out in the middle of the lake with a conductive stick in your hands in the middle of the lake, sadly, helps your odds go way up. So here's some interesting facts about lightning. Lightning strikes last 0.01 seconds, but can contain a whopping 10 million volts of energy. Now, here's some comparisons. You're like, 10 million volts.
All I can think of now is just Back to the Future. Like, great Scott!
It's a lot. So compare
I have
that.
to get back to the boat launch, Marty!
ASAP. 10 million volts of energy. How do you compare that? Well, high voltage power lines are 100,000 volts. Okay. So not even close. And an electrical outlet in your house. I'm sure all of us when we were a kid, we stuck a fork or something in the outlet. That's only 110 volts.
Not everyone's as bright as you, Jesse.
I was bright for a very quick second. So the temperature of lightning is actually around 30,000 degrees on the Kelvin scale, which is 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Okay?
Thankfully, it's not sustained like to any
Yes.
extent.
So that is why getting struck by lightning is bad.
Oh, I thought it was healthy. It's like, rejuvenating.
Yeah. Another successful fishing trip. So the loud clap of thunder and bright flash from lightning can rupture your eardrums if it happens too close. You've ever had you're fishing and you see a lightning strike and it seems very close, but it's probably a few kilometers away. There have been instances where it happens very close to someone and actually blinds them because it's so bright. And thunder can also deafen you, as I mentioned. So even worse, a lightning strike can cause cardiac arrest, which stops the body from circulating blood and injures the brain and nervous system. It can cause respiratory arrest. Basically, it'll knock the air right out of you. So you literally can die. And this can lead to brain hemorrhages and strokes. So it's something serious if you get struck by lightning. And again, this happens to people every year, which is crazy. Now, this is interesting. Most lightning strikes aren't deadly. So you would think after reading all that information, you're like, okay, it's the surface of the sun. It's, a million volts, like whatever. If you get struck by lightning, you're dead. But in majority of the cases, it just causes very serious injuries instead of death, which I don't know if that's a better thing or a worse thing. I'm not sure at this point. So they cause long-term health issues, obviously. Internal injuries, they can burn your body. And I don't know if you've ever seen a burn victim from a lightning, and they have
It's like lightning-scaped scars.
just like crazy.
Well, it's just like they have that, what's that technique in like wood burning where they soak a piece of wood, put 2 nails in and send a current and like all these like cracks of burning electricity goes through. And that's literally the scarring on your body from a lightning strike.
See, Andrew thinks that's cool. I just picture Andrew meeting someone who got struck by lightning, heaven forbid. And he goes, wow, that's a cool design.
Nice tat, bro.
Now, on a more serious note, if you do get struck by lightning, long-term effects can include seizures, muscle spasms, memory loss, and cataracts from the bright light. Everything about this is terrifying and scary. Other side effects, which is very interesting, include mood swings, chronic pain, and even personality changes. So imagine this, you're fishing, you get struck by lightning, and all of a sudden you just don't like fishing anymore.
Imagine getting struck
How
by lightning and now
terrifying
you're
is that?
afraid of fire.
Yeah. So
classic literature.
as I was looking up this information, I saw a few questions, and some of them, when you're on Google, there's some questions you're like, who would think that? That's so dumb, This was one frequently asked question about lightning. Some may wonder, is it safe to touch someone who was struck by lightning?
It's not like they were walking across the carpet with socks on.
Yeah.
Like, what, my lightning?
Yeah.
Like,
The answer is yes. Lightning victims do not carry an electrical charge and you will not be electrocuted by touching someone who has been struck by lightning. It is safe to touch a lightning victim and administer first aid immediately. Now, I know we kind of laughed about this because the odds are very low. This is something very serious. 100% be very careful. One of the best things you can do is just keep your eye on the weather and the radar. I found sometimes though, the weather is not correct. Like we'll be out and all of a sudden out of nowhere, this big black cloud will come out of nowhere because, the weatherman's never right. You have to get off the lake as soon as possible. You got to get off because if you're the tallest thing on that body of water, lightning is probably going to hit you.
being, like Jesse said, the tallest thing on the body of water or in that area, you're creating a shortcut for those electrons to match up to with the negatively charged electrons in the sky, in the cloud, and the positive ones. Like if you're the tallest thing, that's the shortest route.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's where you are more than what you are as to what's going to get a lightning strike.
So what type of fear do you think this would be?
Rational.
Totally rational. Yes.
Yeah.
Imagine someone's like, that's irrational. I think lightning's made up.
You ever seen the pictures of the guys? I think it was a graphite rod that got struck by lightning. It was like sitting on a dock, and he's like, it's like a foam handle, and it's like fuzz.
Yeah. You don't want that to happen to you. So that was pretty scary. But
Wow.
the next one, apparently, Andrew said, is super scary. So what is the next fear that an average Ontario angler could have to face while fishing?
Okay, so I'm going to give you some of the statistics of the creature first.
Okay. Do it.
It can weigh between 64 and 197 pounds.
Okay, so possibly me.
It can move at a top speed of 30 miles per hour or more.
Not me.
It's quite solitary, super stealthy.
That's me.
And now I'm going to give you some of the names.
Okay.
Sometimes called a catamount, a mountain screamer, a red tiger, a Mexican lion, an American lion, a puma, a panther, or the cougar. So we or mountain lion is another one.
Yeah.
So these are things that we've all heard about them. Like, yeah, Andrew, I've seen BBC's Planet Earth, and I've never seen them film them in Ontario. However, in 2017 in Thunder Bay, there was a carcass found on the side of a road of a cougar. In 2021, in Pukaskwa National Park, which is just in the north side of Lake Superior,
Okay.
they had trail cam footage of cougars, or of a cougar. In 2023, the MNRF confirmed sightings of a cougar in Cannington, Ontario.
Cannington?
Do you know how close Cannington is to, like, us?
Like an hour?
Yeah, it's an hour out of the GTA.
Wow.
That's it.
That's crazy.
It's south of, like, Cannington is pretty much just west of Lake Scugog. So that was found this year.
Wow.
Confirmed sightings. So they are coming back into Ontario. They do keep a very wide range, so it's very hard to get an accurate number of how many there are out there. They're estimated to be anywhere between less than 100 to into the, close to 1,000 in Ontario at this point in time. And Ontario is huge, and a lot of them are up north, but they are moving further and further south. There's becoming more popular further down. Like I said, Cannington is not far. And sometimes these are just the males. They go on long wandering tours and they try and find new territory. So it could just be like passing through and it's gone. It's not there anymore, maybe. Or it could be residents. The one in Cannington apparently has been around, and there were sightings of it for years beforehand. So it sounds like it's a resident in that area. So generally they keep away from humans. But if you do get attacked by a cougar, and they happen, and down in the States where they're more popular, and back in the 1800s when they were kind of all, there's a big migration moving west, panther attacks were a very rational fear and a real thing that happened. And what they would do is they would hide in the trees above the wells where they know that they would come in frequent, and they would drop down.
They're just like velociraptors.
So if you're getting attacked, or if there's one that's stalking you, because they'll stalk their prey like silently, you won't know it's there. Chances are it has seen thousands of people, and maybe one person has seen it.
Yeah.
They are that stealthy. And so you probably won't know it's there until it's 2.5-inch claws and 400 psi bite force, and 2-inch canines are either in the back of your head or in front of your throat. Like that thing, when they attack, they are going for the kill.
Ugh.
This is not, hey, like I'm going to give you a swat. Like they're trying to take you down.
So as an angler, if you were trout fishing possibly, or you're fishing, say, in, a provincial park or like backcountry camping, it's a possibility.
Yeah,
It may be a small one.
They're
but-
not really going to enter, down in the GTA because there's not enough space. They don't want humans around. But the reason why attacks happen in more recent years, in the modern times, is generally because we're moving across their territory. So the people that get attacked are hikers, are, mountain bikers and stuff like that. These ones that are out there in the woods. And like I said, these things can be up in the tree, jumping like through trees, tracking you. Like it's terrifying.
All right. That by far is the most terrifying one so far. Because lightning, it is terrible, but it doesn't stalk you.
Yeah.
Okay. I give that a terrifying level of 9. And I would say that's a rational fear for sure. Not irrational at all.
Yeah. I'd much rather, that's the thing. If you see one, it's because it wants to be seen pretty much. It's not afraid of letting you know it's there. That's
And I was going to say,
part.
the sad thing is it couldn't even be a primal fear, because a primal fear is something that we sense. And like you said, we won't sense that it's there. By the time we see it, we're already dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was pretty crazy. So before we get on to our next scary thing, terrifying thing, I thought right now we could just ask you guys and girls, if you've already given us a review on Spotify or on Apple, you can actually type out a review, or if you're on YouTube, make sure to give us a thumbs up, write us a review, even if it's a few sentences. We read all of them. It really helps the show grow because it helps us get better ratings and it helps our show get pushed to the top. We really appreciate that. All right, so the next one is, oh my goodness, I don't even want to talk about this one. Woo. The next thing that is terrifying, absolutely, and you're not even gonna know what I'm gonna talk about. Grass carp.
Mm-hmm.
Are you terrified?
I don't want them at all.
They are an invasive fish that is threatening to invade Canadian waters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I thought we could go over just a little bit of information because a lot of people, including myself, didn't know a lot about grass carp. Because we have common carp here. A lot of people fish for them. They've been here a while. But grass carp are something completely different.
Yeah.
And they're terrifying. So they were introduced to North America in the 1970s. Okay, so they've been here a little bit.
Once again, humans are like, let's introduce this thing that shouldn't be here.
Yeah, exactly. And you may think, why did we bring them here? Well, there's a lot of lakes that were just choked with weed. Mm-hmm. And grass carp eat aquatic vegetation. So they're like, oh, we'll bring these fish in, they'll come and they'll eat the weeds. Problem solved, right? Not really. So why are they so scary? Well, they eat a lot of weeds. Now that sounds like crazy. You're like, well, that's not a big deal, is it? Like there's lots of lakes around here that are full of weeds. Maybe that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
It's not.
No.
And we're going to discuss why. And we're going to discuss why it's terrifying. There's actually, just so you know first, there's no established populations of grass carp in Canadian waters of the Great Lakes. However, this is the scary part. Researchers have found evidence of grass carp reproduction in 2 U.S. tributaries of Lake Erie.
Yeah.
So these fish are basically have access to Lake Erie, and all the Great Lakes are connected.
So there's no breeding populations yet discovered in Canada, but the fish themselves have been found in Canada waters.
Yeah.
Essentially, like Lake Erie is part of, even if it might be that side of the lake, it's still a Canada water, I would say.
Yeah. Now, why is it such a big deal? You may think, oh, their carp came here and it's not a big deal. Well, grass carp, I didn't know this. This is crazy. They can eat 40% of their weight every day in aquatic plants.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to make you do math right now, but if you had to eat 40% of your weight, how much would it be? Like hypothetically, think in your head if you're listening to this.
Personally, I'd be eating 90 pounds of vegetation.
Holy smokes.
It's like, you need to go on a diet.
You need to go to the gym.
I am.
But if you were eating like 90 pounds of salad, you'd probably be fine.
Imagine like how much salad that is, though.
Yeah. So you may think, okay, they eat a lot of vegetation. Well, here's the thing. They grow up to 5 feet long and weigh 80 pounds.
Yeah.
So these things are huge. They're up to 5 feet long, 80 pounds. So you have to think that one fish that is 80 pounds and 5 feet long eats 40 pounds or
35
pounds
a day.
A day in weeds. Now, sometimes when we're fishing the Kawarthas and, you have to pull up the trolling motor because there's all that weeds. Remember that big hunk of weeds you pull off the end and you're like, dang, weeds are everywhere. The thing is, we need those weeds. And we're going to talk about that very quickly.
I was going to mention, too, that it talks about how much they can clear out. So just 10 grass carp per hectare can reduce aquatic vegetation. So do you know what a hectare is? It's 10,000 square meters.
Okay.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So just 10 grass carp can take 50% of the weeds out of an area that's 10,000 square meters big. Like, you think of how fast they can grow, how fast they can reproduce with all this food. That is a danger.
Yeah. And it's a huge threat to the Great Lakes. The economy and the ecological impacts on the lake is crazy. And then we're going to talk some of this right now. Mm-hmm. So then there's so many negative impacts for so many things, the wildlife in our lakes, as well as like the impacts that fishermen actually have, like commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen like ourselves. So grass carp, the funny thing is, I didn't know this, grass carp, they eat all this weed or like aquatic vegetation, but they only digest half of that. So that's kind of weird, right? So what do they do with the other? All that plant material they eat, they expel back into the water. And what does that do? It actually decreases the water quality. Mm-hmm. So you may have a lake that, good water quality. A lot of the lakes with a lot of weeds, they have pretty clear water. It's nice. You get some of these grass carp in there, they're chewing up weeds and just spitting out like chewed up weeds, and the water quality just goes downhill. You may think, what, there's, some of the lakes, we need fish in there for other fish to eat. The problem is these grass carp grow so big, so fast that any predators in the lakes, you have to think, a muskie, say you have a 45-inch muskie, which in our lakes around here there's 45-inch muskies and a lot of them. Yeah. But they can eat a fish up to a third of their size. Yeah. Okay. Grass carp quickly pass that size. So there's not a lot of muskie in the lake. So these fish get so big so fast that nothing can eat them. Ospreys can't pick them up. They're too heavy. Like you can't see an osprey picking up a 5-foot fish trying to lift it up. So they get to the point where like fish can't eat them. Birds can't eat them. Mm-hmm. So they're literally unstoppable and they're eating like crazy. So it's actually interesting. So in 2016 and 2017, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, they basically did a risk assessment. What would happen if these fish got into the Great Lakes? Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to go over all this. If you want to look up this information, send us a message and I'll send it to you because it's a very interesting read.
Yeah. We're going to have the link in down below as well.
Yeah. So they were just saying how this would severely impact the ecology and the economy. When grass carp come into a lake, they reduce the food and habitat for commercially targeted fish populations, which means that these guys that are going out commercial fishing, they're trying to catch fish. Mm-hmm. They're not catching as many. Okay. That's one thing. They reduce the quality of native fish species, which would affect, anglers that are going out trying to catch them. Mm-hmm. And there's increased operational costs. Like there's less fish. So these guys are driving around farther to catch fish, and the price of gas and everything. It all affects everything. So it's interesting that they calculated that over 10 years, there would be $244 million in Canada and $102 million in the US. That is the impact that these fish would have.
It's like lost profit
on the fisheries. Yeah, that's crazy. So there's actually a list. And I think it would almost be easier to mention the fish that having grass carp in your lake would not affect.
Yeah. Well, not directly affect.
So why don't, Andrew has this list too. Why don't we just go through them? This is popular angling species that would be very badly affected.
Yes.
By having grass carp in the lake. Why don't you start with the first one?
The first one is, again, we talk about commercial fishing, walleye. Yeah. Like this is a thing that so many guys go out there to fish. But walleye, they spawn in vegetation. So that's where they deposit their eggs, is on the weeds. They need them to reproduce. And then they also, they feed. When you think of you fishing a local area, the Kawartha Lakes, what do they say to catch walleye? Oh, it's like rip jigs. Guess where you're doing that? In weeds.
In the weeds.
So now they can't reproduce. The carp would eat up to, again, like we said, 40% of their body weight a day. So you're decreasing the spawning amount of spawning grounds and also of your ambush territory for these walleye.
Yeah. Smallmouth bass. It's just the fact that these grass carp can outcompete many native species. And it's a lot of these. We're going to go through them a lot quick. But these grass carp, they can dramatically alter the food web that smallmouth bass rely on to be one of the top predators in the lake. We think, again, a lot of the Kawartha Lakes where we fish, smallmouth bass are one of the top predators in the lake. And now they have all this extra competition of these massive fish.
And you think of like how it impacts these things. Like I said, it's getting rid of the food web. So what else is something in our lakes that smallmouth eat that prey almost exclusively eats vegetation? Crayfish. Crayfish eat way more vegetation than they do meat. They're opportunistic feeders, but most of the crayfish are in weed beds. We just don't see them. And these smallmouth are in there picking away. If you get rid of that, the crayfish populations dramatically decrease because that's where they spawn as well. They have to lay their eggs and stuff in the weeds. Yep. So now you get rid of that much of the crayfish, you're going to have way less food for the smallmouth in that regard too.
Yeah. And then some of these fish, we're just going to go through them because they get affected in very similar ways. Muskie, yellow perch, northern pike, they all spawn on weeds, just like walleye, right? So they spawn on weeds. So if there's less weeds, there's less spawning area. And if there's less spawning area, less fish can spawn. And if less fish spawn, there's less fish to catch.
Yep.
It very quickly snowballs into something that is absolutely terrifying if these fish get into our lakes.
Imagine largemouth bass fishing, but there's no lily pads to flip or no frogs to fish over top of them.
Oh, that's terrifying. I don't even want to think about that. So some of these other fish here, I'm just going to run through some of these quick.
Can we read it like a disclaimer?
Okay, I'm going to let Andrew read this like a disclaimer. These are fish, native species that would experience high to moderate impacts of having grass carp in their lakes. Here we go.
Spotted gar, long-nosed gar, bowfin, northern red-bellied dace, brassy minnow, redfin shiner, golden shiner, pug-nosed shiner, bridal shiner, black-chin shiner, black-nosed shiner, blaming shiner, pug-nosed minnow, lake chubsucker, big-mouth buffalo, yellow bullhead, grass pickerel, northern pike, muskellunge, central mud minnow, banded killifish, banded black-striped top minnow, green sunfish, pumpkin seed, warmouth, bluegill, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, white crappie, black crappie, least darter, walleye, gizzard shad, white sucker, yellow perch, white bass.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I messed up.
I'm pretty sure we mentioned every fish that ever existed. So that... I know this may not sound as terrifying as getting struck by lightning or getting attacked by a cougar, but this, in my opinion, this is way more terrifying.
This could wipe out fishing in our local lakes.
So you may wonder, what do you do if you catch one? What if you catch one? Do you know what one looks like? Do you personally know what a grass carp looks like? Do you? I've seen pictures. I've never seen one.
I've never seen one
in real life.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you catch one? That's an interesting question. Well, first of all, of course, we need to know what they look like. Now, we're going to describe them to you, but we're going to put some pictures up on our YouTube if you want to look at them. And we're also going to put links down to the identification guide. So this identification guide will go over exactly what these fish look like and what to do if you catch one. So that's going to be in the show notes below. So invasive grass carp. There's a few features that you can see by looking at them. Why don't you cover the first few, Andrew?
They're silverfish. They have very large scales with a dark outline around each scale. And one of their most prominent things you're going to find is they're called a carp, but they still have a jawed mouth. So you don't have a sucker mouth. If you're to describe it, I'd say it looks similar to like a herring kind of mouth. So it is a fully developed one. And the big thing to help identify even further, that eye looks very peculiar. It's in the center of the head. So if you're trying to identify it and you're looking at it, it looks like a weird fish.
Yeah, the eye,
a big, like a fairly large mouth, bright silver with some dark shading around the scales, and this eye, like the center of its head, or like right on the side.
Yeah, it says eyes are low and sit in line with the mouth.
Yeah, and
like you said, it's very peculiar. It's not like any freshwater fish that I've seen.
Yeah,
very weird.
The closest thing I'd say it looks like is a fall fish. But if you look at the two side by side, you'll see that eye placement is completely different.
Yeah. And
it's if you have one in your hands, it's noticeable. So just by taking a look now in advance, you'll now be able to recognize, what is this when you catch it?
Exactly. So when you catch one, say you think you caught one, you're going to quickly look up this ID chart. And it'll actually show you, like what Andrew said, it'll have pictures of this fish so you can positively identify it because this is something serious. These guys want to know exactly where you caught this fish. So this is what you do. You're going to go through the ID chart. If all of the identification matches up and you're like, this is 100% a grass carp, 100%, and you're 100% sure, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to take photographs of the fish from multiple angles with adequate lighting and note your longitude and latitude, like know where you are, where you're fishing exactly in that body of water. You're going to take a bunch of pictures of this fish. You're going to call the number. There's a hotline number right there. It's going to be in the show notes below. Again, one thing we have to mention, you have to be absolutely sure before you go to the next step that this is a grass carp, because the next step is you are not supposed to release these fish.
No.
These are to be killed.
We don't want them in the water.
Yeah. So it says kill the fish without damaging the head or eyes. Gut the fish and keep it in a cooler with its head above the ice. Fisheries and Oceans Canada will collect it. They analyze basically the fish and the head and the eyes to make sure if the fish was fertile or sterile. They can tell that from the test. That's why you don't want to damage the head
and its origin too. You can tell that. Because another big thing is, like, how would you say to kill a fish without damaging the head? Because I remember I had heard about these things before, and one of the things, the reason why they want the head in place is because apparently there's an inner ear bone structure, and you don't want that damaged because that gives a lot of information. So just bonking the thing on the head, that can damage that. So they don't want you to damage the head. That's pretty important because they want to be able to have the benefit of researching this when they do collect it. I mean, my suggestion would be if you can cut the gills, they bleed out rather quickly.
It's still humane.
It's more humane than, you can't knock it out because you don't want to damage that head, but it's probably the quickest, most humane way other than letting a fish just gasp for air for forever. And then just put it on ice and just keep its head above ice. So the whole body's underneath the ice, but keep the head above it.
So that's what you do if you possibly catch one, because they have been caught. They have caught a few of them in the Great Lakes, like we mentioned, but they don't want them to become established here. So that is, I thought it was a cool fear, but it was also something that's like, it's a good public service announcement kind of too, because this is something that actually, if this happens, this will affect you a lot if you love fishing like we do. So how would you say, what kind of fear would that be?
That's a rational one.
It's very rational.
It's right on the doorstep.
Yes.
So we need to take it seriously.
Yeah. Okay, so we have one more fear.
Ooh.
One more fear. And that's actually me again, because we picked 5 and it's uneven. So I thought I'd do the last one. Why not? So, hypothermia.
Ooh.
I know we talked a little bit about that in our 2 podcasts ago about fall fishing, or fishing in the fall and the cold temperatures. But hypothermia is something that is very scary and terrifying because thousands of people die every year in Canada from hypothermia. It's a big problem.
Thousands. That's crazy.
Yeah, thousands. So interestingly enough, if you didn't know this, a normal body temperature is approximately 37 degrees, right? Or 99 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. So this is interesting, when the core body temperature in your body drops by 1 or 2 degrees, or if your body is exposed to severe cold, it increases your risk for all these harmful effects that I'm going to tell you.
Ooh. They're
terrifying. So first of all, let's go through. There's 3 stages. Did you know this? There's 3 stages of hypothermia.
I know one of them is you go crazy, but that's all I know.
So stage 1 is when your body temperature drops by 1 or 2 degrees, like I mentioned. What happens? Well, you start shivering, you get goosebumps on your skin, and your hands become numb. Now, as a fisherman, as an ice fisherman, probably this has happened to you multiple times, right?
Yes.
You're like, it's stage 1 hypothermia.
Huh.
No big deal, right? You may notice that your breath becomes quick and shallow, and you may feel increasingly tired or sick to your stomach. That just sounds like a regular day ice fishing for me. But you also may experience a warm sensation, which means your body is entering stage 2, which gets even more terrifying.
Yeah, this is the part that I've heard before. That's bizarre.
Yeah. So stage 2, your body temperature has dropped by almost 4 degrees. And you're shivering strong. You ever had...
And that's internal temperature too. That's not just like, oh, I'm cold on the outside. Like when your core temperature starts dropping, that's huge danger.
Yeah. And it says uncontrollable shivering. You ever had like shivering that's just so crazy?
I hate it when you get sick and you get like shivers down to your bones. Like it's the worst feeling.
Yeah. I've had that like when I had like a flu one time and I was shivering so uncontrollably. My wife was like, are you cold? I'm like, no, I'm burning up. But like my body was just shaking. So you get that. It says muscles are uncoordinated and movements are slow and labored. You may suffer mild confusion. You become pale. Your lips, ears, fingers, and toes may turn blue. So I'm hoping this doesn't describe a normal ice fishing trip for you.
Yeah, that shouldn't get that far.
Now, they actually gave us an easy checklist to see if you have stage 2 hypothermia. So you may be fishing and you're like, you know what? I'm cold, but I'm not that cold. I'm going to do this test to make sure that I'm not in stage 2. Stage 1 is like, okay, you're cold. Stage 2 is like, now there's a problem. Okay. So here's the test. Try touching your thumb to your little finger. If you can't, your muscles are not working properly and you're experiencing stage 2 hypothermia. That's a pretty...
It seems like simple to do. Like, how could I not do that? But
when your hands get cold and stiff. Yeah. So that's the test. So if you're ice fishing and say you weren't dressed properly or you fell in the water and you can't move your fingers together, your pinky and your thumb, you're in stage 2 hypothermia,
You're
which
in
is
grave danger.
grave danger.
Make phone calls, get people to help you. Don't rely on yourself at this point.
Now, stage 3, your body temperature drops below 32. Oof. The shivering will stop, but you have trouble speaking, thinking, and walking. You may even develop amnesia. When your body temperature drops below 30, exposed skin becomes blue and puffy. It will be hard to move. Your muscles and your behavior become irrational. So you basically become crazy.
Yeah.
Your heart may be beating quickly, but your pulse and breathing will decrease. At this stage, you are at the risk of dying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is serious. This happens every year to ice fishermen.
I heard a story, and this is going back probably 15 years or so, but it was in the news of, I think it was a hiker. I can't remember where exactly. It was fairly like in southern Ontario.
Yeah.
And I think it was a hiker. He got lost, started to get hypothermia. And then they found him. He was like hugging a tree with like underwear on. He had shed all his clothes because going through the symptoms, you start shivering, but then you get this warm feeling, and so you just don't think clearly. And you're like, "Oh, I'm hot. I'm warm." And you start taking off your layers, and you literally go crazy. And these people, that just speeds up the hypothermia.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
you may think, you know what, that will never happen to me, but it happens every year. Like we said, it can happen, when you're ice fishing, it could happen when you're hunting in the fall. It could happen when you're hiking, like Andrew said. If it ever quickly gets colder than the outside temperature, it can happen. It doesn't have to be like minus 50 outside for you to get hypothermia.
So I looked it up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have that temperature. Do you know what temperature it is that you can actually, there's a risk now of hypothermia?
No.
10 degrees Celsius. Anything less than 10 degrees Celsius. So it's still like in the plus degrees. But like we were musky fishing the other day, and it was, 9 degrees, 8 degrees.
Yeah.
We can be at risk of hypothermia even in like positive temperatures above freezing. It's still low enough that your core temperature can start dropping.
That's crazy. So what can you do to not get to stage 2 or stage 3? Of course, always wear clothing that's appropriate for the weather. You're going to want to wear synthetic or wool fabrics like our last podcast sponsor, Wool Love. Yeah. A little shout out there.
Some merino wool. That'll keep you warm.
And like it said, merino wool in general, or wool, it pulls moisture away from the body, which actually helps you not get as cold.
Yeah. You don't want wet clothes. So even ice fishing, like we'll often open our jacket when we're walking out because we're starting to sweat.
Yep.
You don't want to be sweaty because as soon as you stop moving, now all this wet moisture is stuck to you, and now you're at higher risk of hypothermia.
Yep. Make sure to dress in layers with a wind-resistant outer layer. You can remove the layers, like Andrew said, if you get too hot, and then put them back on when you get cold. Make sure you wear warm socks, gloves, a hat, a scarf if you're in cold weather, and be sure to put a scarf over your nose to protect it. And this is on like really cold temperatures. You don't want to go ice fishing when it drops down to like minus 30 or colder and be like, oh, I forgot my hat. Well, there goes my ears. Like you need to have it. So what happens though if you do get hypothermia? We said all those terrifying symptoms. What should you do if you were like, you know what, I have hypothermia right now, and you're waiting for help? You've called for help. This is what you should do. Number 1, find shelter. Number 2, keep your muscles moving. So keep walking around. Make sure that you dry yourself. If possible, start a fire. Dry yourself. If your clothes are wet, take them off, dry them, stand by the fire, get warm. Wrap yourself in a blanket. Or you can actually, it depends how close you are with your fishing buddy, but skin to skin contact is good because it transfers some heat. Drink warm, sweet liquids. And it says, don't fight shivering. Shivering is your body trying to get heat.
It's keeping active.
Yeah. And if say you're fishing and your buddy has hypothermia and they're unconscious, lay them down and avoid shaking or handling them roughly, as they may have an irregular heartbeat. So if you shake them, you may think, oh, I need to get his body moving. Don't, because their heartbeat may be irregular and that can cause bad problems. So you're going to want to...
movement has to be themselves.
Get them warm a different way, put on some blankets, get a fire started, all that stuff. Yeah. So that is very much a rational fear. That is something that it happens every year. This podcast, we try to keep this entertaining, but all of these things that we talked about, especially I would say the hypothermia is probably the biggest threat because that could happen to everyone. How many times have you probably been in stage 2 hypothermia?
More than I'd care to admit, that's for sure.
Yeah. So it's terrifying. And all these things, we had, what was the first one? Do you remember?
Mad Tom.
Mad Tom, right? So that's something, that was a funny one.
Yeah.
And then we had, mountain lions. Like that is crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Grass carp, that is terrifying in so many levels. And then we had lightning. That is,
again,
I don't even want to talk about that anymore. And then we have hypothermia, which is
so
crazy.
it sounds like going ice fishing is an extreme sport, or going fishing in general.
Yeah.
It's like an extreme sport.
It is.
You're taking your life in your hands.
Anglers have it pretty tough. So
That's right, all you other guys playing hockey. That's a lazy sport. Just try and get yourself killed by going fishing.
We're going to go through some of our viewer on our Instagram. I put a question up and I asked a bunch of people, what is your biggest fishing fear? And some of them are more funny. We don't have a lot of time, so I thought we could just go through and read some of the funny ones. This is a popular one. Angling Up North says, getting hooked to a thrashing muskie.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Any fish.
I don't want to talk about that. Yeah. A lot of people said treble hooks and a thrashing fish.
I've been hooked with treble hooks, but I've never thankfully had a fish on another treble hook like at the same time. That just terrifies me.
Yeah.
I've come close. That pike almost got me.
Yeah. This guy named Uncle Brian Carrot, he says motor failure. That is a fear for me because like I've been out with guys in the middle of bigger lakes and their motor dies several times, and you're just like, we are stranded. And sometimes you're like, oh, just call for help. Sometimes you're out there in like maybe early spring or late fall and there's no one out there.
Yep.
And you could just, maybe then the lightning comes in and you're like, well, now I'm doomed. That's a terrible one. This is one of my actual biggest fears, and Andrew probably knows what it is. What is it?
Snapping turtles?
Yes. Getting chomped on by a snapping turtle wading through dirty water. Snapping turtles terrify me.
Yeah.
We have another story about that, but we can't do it. We don't have enough time today.
We got a few stories about snapping turtles.
This is a funny one. This guy says, when a raccoon comes out of nowhere. That's happened a few times. But Andrew has a pretty good story about a beaver coming out of nowhere. We're not going to talk about that. Had a few people say the Sasquatch.
Ooh, yeah. The North American Yeti.
Yep. Spearing a wave so large in my tinner that I sink. That's what Mark Ben said.
Yeah.
Yep.
Spearing a wave. That's when you go right through the middle of it.
A lot of people just said losing a giant fish is their biggest fear. It's a fear, but not the exact fear we're talking about. Yeah. A lot of people said hooks in their face.
Yeah.
Getting a hook in your arm, you're like, no problem. Getting one in your face or near your eye or in your eye, that is terrifying. Yeah. Losing a favorite lure, that's a big fear. Carson Lockhart said that, losing a favorite lure.
Sounds like he's speaking from personal experience.
Yeah. NW Outdoors, Brody says a dead body.
My uncle found one while fishing.
Really?
At the family cottage. And because it's on a river, so it turns out the guy had a heart attack. He was one of the first ones at the cottages in the spring, and found a guy hung up in a laydown. And apparently he had a heart attack or something, or a stroke while he was on his dock, fell in the water and unfortunately drowned. But he floated downstream until he got hung up, and my uncle was the one who found him. Oh,
that is terrifying.
At least that's what I've heard from the family. So,
Paul E83, boat sinking in cold water, an inflatable life jacket doesn't fully fill up because of cold air. Well, Paul, thanks for that new fear.
Yeah.
You know, actually, we're going fishing with Paul this weekend, so I'm hoping that doesn't happen. So many people getting hooked by a treble hook.
Yeah.
So many people said that. Here's one that a lot of people mentioned. Getting shot by a hunter, duck hunting season. You know, you got a lot of the guys that are set up and you're fishing, and sometimes some spray shot,
Yeah.
Some.
I've had that happen.
Yep.
Like they were shooting clay pigeons or skeet off the guy's property right over in front of the bay we were fishing, and there's just a hail of pellets around you. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. Quick side story. I got shot by a lady with a BB gun when I was fishing in my kayak because she was shooting Canadian geese.
It's not what you think. It's not like, get off my property. No. You can't fish here.
No, I was silently fishing in my kayak years ago on a popular Kawartha Lake, and all the Canada geese, if you've ever been up there, they go up on people's property. So this lady came out in hair rollers and a robe, and she took out a pump action BB gun, started pinging these things, and she smoked my boat. And I was like, what the heck? And she's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. And then she ran inside. This is actually a good one. Jay Matthews says, the ball nipper.
Good callback. The pacu.
Yeah. A lot of people have this fear. Hooking a bird. Andrew's done that.
Yeah, twice.
Yeah. He's great at it.
And both times, a successful release.
Yep. This is a big fear. Chadwick says this, hooking someone else. I think that's a bigger fear. I'd rather hook myself, obviously, than hook someone else, especially a stranger. You see people like casting from shore and people are walking by. If I hooked Andrew, I'd feel bad, but if it was some random guy.
If I hooked Jesse, I'd laugh.
Yeah.
People say like getting a hook, it is scary. I will say though, having had it done, or having done it myself, it's something, be careful about it. You're not like willy-nilly, I don't care, I'm going to do it on purpose. But it's not as bad.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't as bad as the whole idea of it is. Thankfully.
Yeah.
It's the one fear that is actually less, it's easier than what it seems.
Yeah. I took it out for you. That's why it went well. Fishing for nugs says, bird nesting my one and only rod when out bank fishing. That's terrible. Okay,
if you're bank fishing, then you can still get back to your car or whatever. If you're out in the water and that happens, you got to like paddle back, then get to your car.
Someone said, a mustachioed stranger or relative. That was my wife. Shout out to my wife. Anyway, so there's a ton of them. If I didn't get to yours, a lot of them were exactly the same. Actually, here's a funny one. Noobs at the boat launch. That is terrifying. Just kidding. It may be terrifying if they, back out and almost, back into your boat. That could be terrifying.
Yeah.
But yeah, so many crazy fears. Hope you guys like this episode. We had a fun time preparing for this.
This is a fun one.
Yeah. So very quickly, I thought we'd just talk about our plans for next season. So we're coming to the end of season 1. And I don't know how many more episodes are left in this season. We haven't decided yet. I think we're at 34 right now.
That's right. We're winging it.
No, but we are actually going to take a month and a half off.
Yep.
And if you're our Patreon members, don't worry. We'll pause your payment so you don't pay us $4 extra. Just kidding. But for season 2, we're really excited because we're actually upgrading.
Yes.
So we are upgrading to be able to have guests on regularly because we're going to be filming in a different location actually, but we're going to save that for another time. But one thing that I'd like you guys to message us is, who would you want to be on our show?
Yep.
What guests would you like? And be realistic. Don't be like, I want you to get Kevin Van Dam on your show. No.
I have a couple of guests that I'd love to have. And we're actually going to see if it might work out. I don't know if I should spoil it. Let's not spoil it because it's not confirmed at all. But a couple guys I would love to have on the show is Pete Bowman and Angela Viola.
Yep.
I would love to talk to those guys and ask them questions that, maybe they don't get asked all the time.
Yeah.
Their lives are on TV for us to watch, their fishing experience and stuff. I want to come up with some cool questions that maybe they don't get asked frequently.
Yeah.
I think it'd be fun.
I also had some good ideas of getting some employees from tackle shops and asking them their funniest customer stories.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Especially you used to work at one, so you know that those stories exist.
I know the stories exist. We want to get on Bobby Belmonte, who is a fishing guide and tournament guy that actually really awesome I had the pleasure of fishing with. Actually, let's talk about that just for a sec. So I actually got to fish with my buddy Paul, and he took me out fishing and surprised me to fish with Bobby for a muskie day on Monday. I had the day off work. Yeah. It was crazy. Highly recommended.
I had to work.
Yeah. I didn't invite Andrew because I knew he couldn't make it. But we had a fantastic day. I learned, so I was grilling him all day long. Just question. This guy got us on muskie. Like, who can say it? Like, if someone's like, oh, Jesse, take me out, and I guaranteed want to catch a muskie, I'd be like, you're screwed. Bobby got us. I caught a 41 inch, and I had another one come up the boat. He knew exactly where the fish were. He's like, there's a fish here for sure. Cast out, 5 minutes later, had one in the net.
Wow.
Another spot. He's like, this spot here, dude, I was pulling up a double dog. Actually, I'll show you right here. So I caught my first fish on a 9-inch gator tube, which Bobby was like, here, chuck this exact bait. The fish love it. Within 5 minutes, I caught a fish on this. The second time I was fishing this double dog, I just got...
Shout out to Waterwolf Lures, a previous sponsor for that one too.
Yeah. This thing came up and I had this musky squirrel right beside the boat. Completely missed it. Look at it. He headshot it. Yeah. So this muskie grabbed the head of this bait. And I guess just the way the hook was, when I swung the hook, it just popped out of his mouth. But the teeth on this thing, if you want to remember our interesting fishing fact from last week about muskie teeth, this thing completely chewed the head of this thing and split the eyeball right in half with his huge teeth. But yeah, Bobby was fantastic. Got to spend a good day fishing with my buddy Paul. And me and Paul learned a lot from Bobby. He's a very experienced and super chill angler. And I honestly learned a lot from him. Me and Andrew, I was like, Andrew, we got to book a day with this guy next year. The guy is like, guides everything, like crappie, walleye, smallmouth, largemouth, muskie. Awesome.
Actually, so we did mention that we went muskie fishing, you and I together, last weekend. And I actually succeeded in something I've been trying to do for years.
Yes.
So
talk about that.
So that we'd been fishing all day and we were joking, I should have just stayed around the boat launch because we rose a couple fish further up for where we were, but where we launched.
We moved 3 fish, which was not bad.
Yeah. And actually the same fish 3 times.
No, I think it was 2 separate fish. Because
there was 2, but we raised one of them. I raised it twice. And we came back. You raised it again.
Yes. Okay. So we actually we had 4 follows technically. Yeah.
So anyways, we came back and I tied on. It's an old pikey chub jointed minnow.
Like what? 6-8 inches?
It's about 8 inches, I think, maybe 7 inches. It's single jointed in the middle. It's tore up. You can see like bits of wood exposed. It's like a cool. I think it was called like black perch or something like that. The old pattern.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law Jacob, he's the one who gave it to me, and I traded him. I forget what bait I traded him for it. And
sucker.
And I was like, I love this bait, and I didn't even have a rod I could cast it with before, but I made it my goal. I'm gonna catch something on this, and I've purposefully kept all the original terminal tackle. So I sharpened those hooks. Those hooks are still some of the sharpest hooks in my tackle box. They're insane. Original split rings. There's like rust all over it. I'm like, I'm just gonna get this thing so it can catch. And the action of this thing, I love it in the water.
Crazy wobble.
So it looks so good. So anyways, I cast out right by the boat launch, fired out by a weed bed, and a couple cranks to the handle, and all of a sudden, like, boom, this fish just nailed it. Set the hook, it jumps to the air. I'm like, it's a muskie. And I got it on. I'm like, Jesse, get the net. It's on the old bait. It's on the pike. It's on the creek chub. It's on the creek chub. And I'm so excited.
Yeah.
We got some amazing shots of it with the lure in its mouth and the net. A couple nice pictures. And despite the muskie is only 32 inches.
It was a gorgeous one.
But beautiful. It's my first muskie that really had like a good pattern on it.
Yeah.
And it was like mainly barred, a couple like spots in the bottom. Like it was really nice.
It was a gorgeous fish.
So my goal for 2 years or 3 years now is I'm going to catch a muskie on this bait, and then I'm going to retire the bait. So that bait has been officially retired.
Nice.
It won't see the water again. I am in the market now for another. I really love it, for another large size pikey chub, like our creek chub pikey minnow, the jointed one. But that one, that's getting retired. It's going to be hung on the wall with a picture of that muskie. So
that's nice. Andrew likes to do that. He buys old lures, catches one fish on it, takes a picture, and then retires it.
That's the first lure I had that plan for.
Yeah.
So it's not the first lure I've retired, but it's the first one I've had that plan for.
That just goes to show you don't need all these fancy rubber baits to catch fish. You can use 1950s crankbaits. Anyway, we're already over time in this episode, but we would like to thank everyone for being a listener. Season 1, like we said, it's coming to an end. Season 2 is going to be, if you thought season 1 was good, thanks. But season 2 is going to blow your socks off.
And we're going to have a bit more content as well for Patreon only content. So those of you who are subscribed to our Patreon,
there will be benefits.
Have some benefits for you guys to come.
Anyway, we'd like to thank you for listening to episode 34 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. And we will see you soon. But before we end, we have the quote of the week.
Watch out for lightning.